I used to believe that love was just stubbornness with nicer manners, a willingness to keep showing up even when the door never fully opened. That was why I let myself hope on Mother's Day. Not for fireworks, not for some miraculous healing chorus after years of being told without words that I took up the wrong kind of space. I hoped for something quieter and more ordinary, a morning where my presence didn't feel like static in the room. I brought her favorite perfume, the one she wore when I was a kid, and the word sweetheart came easy along with fresh flowers from a local shop, because grocery store bouquets always look like apologies and a letter I wrote in ink. I'd sealed it in a red envelope, the stubborn kid in me insisting that color might be the bridge a decade of careful distance couldn't build. The house shimmered with brunch energy, cloth napkins and place cards and sugared rims on glasses. She looked up when I walked in. "Oh, you made it," she said, and I took those 4 words like an 4 drip. Hope is efficient that way, it can sustain you on crumbs. I handed her the gifts. She glanced at the perfume like she was trying to remember when she'd last liked that brand and whether the woman who did still lived in her skin. She said, "Oh, you remembered this one," not quite smiling, and turned back to straighten a centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. My brother Zach carried the conversation like a shiny balloon, joking about dorm life and professors who'd never paid rent, drawing laughter that felt prearranged. I poured myself juice because no one offered a mimosa and told myself I preferred juice anyway. Jake asked about my job and pivoted before I finished answering, like it wasn't a conversation so much as a box to check. There was a folded napkin at my place but no card. A small detail, but I felt its weight. It's surprising how loudly silence can clang when you show up hoping not to hear it. I kept waiting for a pocket of privacy, a moment to hand her my letter the way I'd intended, alone, where the sound of paper being opened might feel like a door creaking on long rusted hinges. But brunch moves like weather, and there was never a pause. So I set the red envelope beside her plate, the color so bright against the white cloth it looked like a warning. Zach smirked and asked if I'd written her a love letter. I said it was a thank you. Everyone pretended that was normal. Someone asked for butter. The table resumed orbit around the planet where I'd never been invited to settle. After we ate, I carried plates toward the kitchen. The trash had already been taken out to the garage. My mother likes things tidy, and I told myself that was all it was. Then I saw the bag propped against the wall, the sun from the half-open door falling across it like a spotlight. The perfume in its box. The flowers' bent stems damaged from a careless shove. The red envelope still sealed, wrinkled. My offerings dumped with the rest of the disposable. The first sensation wasn't even anger, it was heat rising behind my eyes, a private weather system making everything blur. Nobody saw me crouch. Nobody saw me collect the things like evidence not to return, but because I couldn't bear to leave them there. I took them to my car and sat with the engine off, letter on the passenger seat like a heartbeat I could hear. I thought about how long people can survive on the memory of being cherished, and how quickly that memory can sour into humiliation when reality keeps contradicting it. I thought about the way my mother's face softened around Zach's name and sharpened around mine. I thought about being 10 and realizing that love, like attention, is finite when someone prefers a fresh start to a complicated history. I didn't make a scene. I didn't look for her eyes across the room and ask why. There's no honest answer inside a performance. I left. That night, the flowers, the perfume, the letter sat on my kitchen counter like relics from a small religion I'd practiced alone. I didn't open the envelope because I already knew what I'd written, and I didn't need to reread my own hope to feel foolish. Instead, I let clarity arrive like cold, slow tide. I made a decision before dawn, a decision that felt like laying down a weight I'd trained my spine to carry without complaint. The practical part came first. I logged into the accounts I'd been quietly paying, utilities, the little safety nets I'd stretched under my mother's house so the floor didn't feel as thin as it really was. I scheduled final payments. I removed my name. I cancelled an upcoming transfer for Zach's tuition. Then I wrote an email to my mother with a subject line so ordinary it felt like camouflage, re Mother's Day. I told her I'd tucked cash inside the letter to help with tuition and hoped it hadn't gotten lost. It wasn't true. I knew exactly what was in that envelope, a tenderness she didn't want. But the lie wasn't a trick, it was a mirror. If she'd thrown away my gifts, she'd thrown away the possibility that those gifts contained something valuable. Let her feel that possibility for once. Let her sit with the discomfort that had been my constant companion since childhood. By 8 the next morning the texts began. Did you say cash? How much? I didn't see it. I'll check. Then calls, each one ringing with the rising pitch of panic. I let them go to voicemail because panic is a language that doesn't learn unless it hears its own echo. The messages gathered like weather alerts, and I sat in the quiet feeling the stillness of not rushing to fix a problem I didn't create. A little later Jake texted to scold and negotiate, his tone switching between parental and professional, two registers he mistook for authority. I ignored him. Silence has rules once you learn them, and I was done breaking my own. I made tea I didn't drink and realized this was what relief felt like, not triumph, not gloating, just the absence of a job I'd never been paid to do. I remembered when the pivot had happened, when my mother's affection pivoted from daily bread to occasional garnish. She met Jake when I was 10. He slid into our lives the way someone draws a circle around the part of the map they want to own. There were new rules and a new fridge full of baby food and a chore list that had room for everything except the things I needed. My award from school became a reminder to keep an eye on the crib. My concerts lost to nap time. The years blurred around Zach's milestones while my own disappeared. If there were pictures, they were taken with a camera I never found. I told myself it was a phase because that's what children do to survive. But phases harden into habits and habits calcify into identity. I left for college and came back to a house with walls that remembered me less than I remembered them. Still, I kept showing up, folding myself into the spare inches available, buying gifts, paying bills, translating insurance letters, using my contacts to push open a door for Jake, whose confidence had never met a lock it couldn't pick. No one credited me, and I told myself I didn't need credit. I only needed a place to stand. But love that's always paid for on one side becomes something else, barter, performance, penance. On Mother's Day, handing over the perfume I remembered and the letter I meant, I'd wished for a minor miracle to be received without calculation. The trash bag answered with vocabulary I'd avoided learning. That morning after my email, I let the silence do its work. It hummed through my phone, through the apartment, through the hollow at my sternum that hope had kept warm for years. Then a second decision surfaced. I didn't owe Jake my reputation. I'd introduced him to 3 people who made his work possible: clients, vendors, one friend who fundamentally believed in my judgment. I sent them each a brief note asking not to be associated with him professionally from now on. No details, no accusations. Boundaries are quieter than gossip and far more effective. The responses were respectful. I didn't need them to agree with me, I only needed them to stop crediting my name for his access. By lunchtime my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't panic masquerading as apology, it was panic dressed as authority. "You're being childish," Jake wrote. "This is serious." Yes, I thought. It was serious all along, it's just that the consequences had finally arrived at the right address. I walked to the window and watched the city move, people carrying their own mornings around like secrets. I let everything be ordinary for an hour: the neighbor in a rush, the dog learning to sit, the pale light on a building I'd never noticed. I felt my mother's absence the way a healed wound registers weather shifts, a throb that said rain was coming for someone else. I breathed. I didn't pick up the phone. I expected rage to follow, a tidal wave of texts and calls attempting to push me back into the shallow end where I knew my lines. Instead, there was a pause, the kind of pause that smells like calculation. Then late morning my mother's messages turned frantic. She checked the trash, checked the garage, checked every pocket of the past 24 hours. The bag was gone, and so was whatever I'd claimed was inside. I could imagine her standing by the bins, staring into a mouth that only answered with flies and wind. She left a voicemail that was 3 parts apology to 4 parts crisis management, each sentence circling the same point: if I'd known. The words "I'm sorry" arrived like an afterthought, auditioning for sincerity. And for the first time I realized I wasn't hungry for them. When you feed on crumbs long enough, you eventually taste the floor. Around noon, I sent no reply and instead made myself a sandwich nobody else would eat. I ate at the counter where the perfume and flowers sat like a still life. The blooms were tilting toward a sadness that even fresh water couldn't delay. I imagined planting them somewhere and letting them become compost for something that understood sunlight better than we did. The afternoon brought the second wave: Jake's angry professionalism, Zach's defensive condescension. I considered all the times I'd translated their moods and stepped around their mess as a chore chart only I could see. Something stubborn in me, something that had grown tired of being useful, unclenched. I went for a walk and didn't bring my phone. I paid attention to small things: the way heat lifts from asphalt even in spring, the thread of a spider web pulled across a mailbox, the chatter of kids leaving a park without wanting to. The world kept happening, not waiting for my decision to be convenient. It felt like an invitation. When I returned to my apartment, 2 emails were waiting from people I'd messaged about Jake. Both expressed understanding. One said it more plainly than I expected: "If you're stepping back, that tells me what I need to know." I hadn't accused him of anything, I'd simply removed my endorsement, and in certain ecosystems, endorsement is the currency that keeps the lights on. Within the week, I heard a referral had evaporated. Another contract was paused. The job that had once looked like a castle revealed how many bricks were borrowed. I didn't feel triumphant. But I did feel level, like I was finally standing on ground that registered my weight. That evening, my mother called again. Panic applies new costumes when the old ones stop working. She tried benevolence. She tried nostalgia. She tried maternal authority softened with a tremor. Each attempt skirted the center, not the cash that never existed, but the letter that did, the one she'd discarded without reading because my voice on paper did not match the life she'd arranged. I made tea and let it cool. When the cup was warm instead of hot, I poured it out. There is a sort of grief that sharpens you instead of blurring you, and I felt its edge. Days became a practice of not reaching back. It's astonishing how much time returns to you when you stop spending it on storms you didn't cause. I worked, slept, ate, and noticed. I remembered being 10 and measuring love by decibel. I remembered standing backstage at a middle school concert, scanning the audience for a face that had already chosen different seats at a different show. I remembered Zach's first steps and the applause that repaved the entire house. For years I'd called those memories perspective. Now I called them evidence. The quiet lasted 3 days. On the 4th, my mother came to my office. The receptionist paged me with a voice that sounded like a smoke alarm. In the lobby, my mother stood in heels that punctuated the tile. Her blazer was the color of an apology people accept because it looks expensive. We stepped outside into air that couldn't decide whether to warm us. She didn't ask how I was. She asked what I was doing. She accused me of humiliating the family, of jeopardizing Zach's future and Jake's work, of weaponizing a misunderstanding. I listened. Then I said the thing that had sat in my mouth like a pebble I'd been grinding into powder. I saw the letter in the trash. Her face did something I recognized from childhood, the moment between pretending not to hear and pretending to be misunderstood. She said she hadn't realized, hadn't meant to, wasn't sure. The grammar of accidents. I remembered the times she'd been too tired to drive me, too busy to listen, too preoccupied to notice me, small and proud with an award balanced in my hands. The syntax of omission. I told her that if the fallout from my silence hurt, it was because my presence had been carrying too much weight. I told her the utilities were paid through the month and not beyond. I told her the tuition transfer was cancelled and my name was no longer a key Jake could hold up to other people's locks. I said it without heat because heat gives people something to argue with when they can't argue with your decision. She called it punishment. I called it gravity. We stood with the city moving around us and no tidy ending within reach. She waited for the son who could be coaxed back into a role. I let the role stay on the floor where it belonged. We were polite because we had an audience. When she said you're punishing this family, I said then maybe this family should have stopped treating me like a stranger with a checkbook, and I walked back inside knowing how much that would cost and choosing it anyway. The internet rewarded Zach within hours. His vague post about betrayal attracting the co-signs of people who would like any public grievance that asks them for nothing. I received a cousin's message asking whether it was about me, and I answered frankly probably. Jake's work wobble became a slide. I didn't choreograph it and didn't celebrate it. I simply refused to prop it up. When you stop playing your part in other people's myths, they call you the villain. Fine. I'd been a ghost long enough. Days found their rhythm again. I cleaned my apartment without thinking about what messes I'd return to elsewhere. I cooked for myself and ate at a table that had a seat with my name on it because I was the one who placed it there. I walked at dusk when the city looks like someone set the sky under a broiler. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel righteous. I felt uncomplicated. 1 week after Mother's Day, the phone calls turned into a group voicemail. My mother's voice wore syrup. Zach's wore apology like a jacket he'd borrowed. Jake stayed quiet, letting the others do the mending. They asked what I wanted, whether I planned to disown them, whether we could reset and move on. I played the message twice. What I listened for wasn't present, not responsibility, not truth. They wanted to rewind without pressing stop. I blocked the number because sometimes mercy looks like not inviting the performance to another stage. Months unfolded. I got promoted. I moved into an apartment where light arrived like it believed in me. I hosted small dinners where people asked questions and waited for answers. The laughter didn't feel like I'd earned it by being useful, it existed because people liked being in the room with me. I learned the names of my neighbors' dogs. I bought a plant and kept it alive. The simplicity felt radical. The stories families tell about themselves are more stubborn than facts, and in the absence of my role, my mother tried on new ones. A message arrived saying she hoped I was well and was open to talking. The past tense in that sentence was doing heavy lifting. It suggested there was a settled ledger somewhere we could both sign. I didn't reply because some doors remain doors for the safety of everyone on both sides. There were days I wondered if I'd been cruel, if the lie about the cash stained me irrevocably. Then I remembered the garage, the trash bag, the sealed red envelope folded like a mouth forced shut. I remembered stacking the perfume, the flowers, the letter on my own counter and feeling my hope look back at me with tired eyes. I remembered the voicemail where her panic sprinted past anything that sounded like love. I understood something simple and late: boundaries aren't walls that keep people out, they're doors you finally lock from the inside because the draft is costing you heat you cannot afford to keep losing. On a night in late summer, I walked to the river and stood with strangers watching the water pretend it forever. I thought about the kid who learned to pass to make room for a man who liked clean lines and a baby who deserved loud love, and I honored that kid for surviving. I thought about the adult who stayed, paid, tried, endured, and finally put down the chore chart. I honored him for leaving. The river said nothing, which is the most honest thing water does. Quiet revenge was never the point, but I won't pretend it wasn't satisfying to realize how polite silence can dismantle a scaffolding built of my time and access. I didn't need to shout. I only needed to stop explaining. The absence of my name on Jake's lips did more damage than an accusation could have. The absence of my money in their accounts created a space where they could either build their own stability or become acquainted with what instability felt like when the cushion wasn't made of me. The first month after I blocked the number, I woke up earlier than usual and learned what the city sounds like before it's had coffee. It sounded like possibility, like an invitation to participate in a life that didn't demand I audition. I started cooking actual breakfasts, the kind you plate on purpose. I read in the morning instead of scrolling through other people's declarations of loyalty and grievance. I fell asleep with the windows cracked. My body exhaled in places I didn't know had been clenched. I tried to picture the house I'd walked into on Mother's Day, the way everything glowed with curated warmth. I tried to imagine where my gifts had landed in the bag, how long it took for the decision to feel like tidying rather than throwing away. Sometimes I let myself hypothesize that it was an accident, someone clearing surfaces and misjudging what belonged. And sometimes I let the facts sit exactly as they were. Someone saw my offering and decided it was clutter. When you stop turning your own hurt into a puzzle you owe it to others to solve, you get back whole afternoons. A few weeks later, a mutual friend mentioned that Jake had been asked to resign. They called it restructuring. Everyone knew it wasn't. Zach had deferred a semester. He was furious about it in the safe, unfocused way that earned him sympathy without committing him to introspection. My mother, they said, was having a difficult time. People in small circles love to press their palms to other people's grief to feel the shape of it. I said nothing because nothing needed saying. There's a difference between being cruel and refusing to be the story's background extra. I was done being scenery. Another message came through to a secondary email address I hadn't blocked because I'd forgotten it existed. It wasn't from my mother. It was from my aunt, the one whose first text after the trash bag revelation was a single sentence giving me permission she shouldn't have needed to give. She wrote to tell me that my mother was on a softer edge these days, that she was humbler, that she had started taking long walks and talking about gardens and memory. My aunt said none of this as an argument, it was a report and then a wish that I was eating well and sleeping. I answered that I was. I said I was working and reading and making dinners with friends and that my apartment was bright in ways I'd only imagined before. My aunt wrote back a heart. I didn't need her to be my mother. She was a witness and that was enough. One evening I dug the box from my closet and took out the perfume, the flowers long since returned to earth, the envelope still sealed. It felt theatrical to open it after all this time, but the drama of my own life finally belonged to me. I broke the seal. The letter said exactly what I remembered writing. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for what you gave up. I love you even when it hurts. I want to try again. I didn't cry. I folded the paper back up and placed it in the box, a relic from a prior era that deserved the dignity of being archived, not displayed. You can't build a present out of old scaffolding unless you want the same cracks. I put the box away because keeping it out would make it an altar, and I'm done praying to the God of almost. People assume that distance is a weapon. Sometimes it's just the shape of the truth. My mother sent one more message a few months later on a platform we both barely used. It wasn't an apology and it wasn't a demand. It was something in between, a postcard without a return address. She wrote that she saw pictures of my new apartment and it looked beautiful. She said she remembered when I was a kid and would rearrange the furniture in my room after reading the same book, that even then I loved making spaces feel like they fit. She said she hoped I was happy. I read it twice and didn't answer because the path between us had too many trapdoors and I didn't have the desire to test floorboards anymore. But I didn't block her there. I let the message exist, a small signal sent across a map we no longer shared. I met someone slowly, the way you do when your life is already full. He listened without trying to fix, and when I told him the long version of Mother's Day after he asked for it, he didn't make a face that suggested a solution. He asked what I wanted moving forward, a question I'd been too busy mending other people's nets to ask myself. I said I wanted a life built on invitations, not obligations. I said I wanted holidays that didn't require performance. I said I wanted mornings where my hope didn't have to do so much heavy lifting. He said those sounded like rooms we could paint together. We made breakfasts on Sundays and called my aunt to ask about lemon zest. We took walks by the river and pointed at dogs and named them wrong on purpose. I learned that calm isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of reciprocity. I bought tickets to a concert. No one forgot to show up. On the anniversary of that Mother's Day, I woke early and wrote a different letter. Not to my mother, not to the version of me who kept knocking, but to the kid who learned to translate one adult's sadness and one man's preference for clean lines into a map of how to behave. I told him he had done something miraculous. He'd kept loving even when love turned quiet, and when love turned quiet he learned how to listen to his own voice. I folded the letter and tucked it into a book I reach for often. When I read those pages again, I'll find it. Not because I'm searching, but because good reminders know how to return. In the afternoon I passed a florist and bought peonies because they're extravagant and honest about how quickly beauty bruises. I put them in water and watched them open like storytelling. I thought about calling my mother for the space of a breath. Then I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish, but because some acts of restraint are gifts you give to everyone involved. I walked out onto my balcony, watched the light pull gold across 100 windows, and felt a kind of peace that didn't need anyone's approval. The hardest part of leaving isn't the door, it's the room you carry with you out of habit. I spent months putting down furniture I didn't realize I'd been lugging, the urge to anticipate, to soften myself, to become neutral enough to pass through someone else's dream without leaving fingerprints. Slowly I stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. Slowly I stopped rehearsing what I would say if my phone lit up with her name and a sentence that finally fit. Slowly the silence between us grew less like a battlefield and more like a field where something else might grow. The last time my aunt and I spoke, she told me my mother had started a small garden. She says she's learning patience, my aunt said, and I heard both hope and fatigue braided in her voice. She says you can't rush roots. I said I was glad for anything that taught patience. I meant it. If the garden teaches her anything about tending, I hope it includes what you don't pull up and what you don't toss. I don't wish emptiness on her. I wish truth. It's work enough. Some nights I still walk past the river. I like the bridges at dusk, the way strangers become silhouettes and then reassemble into people under street lamps. I think about the lie I told Cash in the letter, and I ask myself the only honest question I know how to ask it now: was it cruelty or a translation? If kindness had ever been the language spoken to me when I needed it, I would not have needed to invent a sentence that carried weight when my actual words did not. My friend says that sometimes we resort to metaphor when reality refuses to do its job. I don't know if he's right, but I know the lie did what truth could not. It let them feel what being discarded felt like. Some lessons arrive wrapped in paper you don't want to touch, and you still have to open them. The first holidays passed and I spent them with people who see me without squinting. We cooked too much food and burned one thing for tradition. We told stories that didn't require footnotes. No one compared griefs like trophies. When a song my mother used to love came on, I didn't change it. I let it play and felt something human and not corrosive move through me. Remembering is not a summons. It's a witness. Occasionally someone asks whether I'll ever reconcile. I say I don't know because I don't. The route to forgiveness isn't a sidewalk, it's a path the weather keeps changing. What I know is this: I will not re-enter any room that requires me to become not myself to be welcome. If we speak again, it will be on a floor we both check for, weak boards with lights on and hands steady. It will be with names used properly, roles retired, new plans decided in real time, and the past acknowledged without being forced to be our only furniture. I won't return to a role, but I might meet a person. That's the only version that has any oxygen in it. When I think about Zach, the ache is different. He is both wound and weather, the way things happened and the climate in which they made sense to everyone but me. He is a boy who learned that applause arrives loudest when you don't share it, and a man who might unlearn that lesson if life does its slow work. He could call me one day. He could ask to talk without an audience. I would listen to the boy who didn't build the house but lived inside it. I don't know if he'll learn to take responsibility for the man he is becoming, but that's his curriculum, not mine to enroll in. As for Jake, I sometimes imagine him standing in front of a mirror practicing contrition the way he practiced charisma, weighing which words open doors when the old keys don't turn. Maybe he's learned the difference between access and intimacy. Maybe he hasn't. Either way, the economy he lived by no longer uses my name as currency. It's a strange relief to know a storm can rage and you don't have to stand outside to narrate it. The last letter I wrote in this story was to myself again, this time one line only: you did not overreact, you stopped underliving. I taped it inside a cabinet door, a private sign for mornings when memory tries to bargain. The sentence sits there like a hand on a shoulder. It doesn't push. It reminds. And on days when old guilt slips back in dressed as generosity, I say out loud the quiet truth that built my new house: love given freely is not the same as love given blindly. One nourishes, the other depletes. If there's a lesson in all this for anyone listening, it's not that silence is a weapon or that lies have utility. It's simpler and harder. When people show you their capacity for care, believe them, not the care they advertise but the care they enact when no one is grading them. Believe the weight of the chair they pull out for you, the space they make without rolling their eyes, the way they remember you without being prompted by your usefulness. Believe the trash bag when it answers the question the smile won't. And when you believe it, act accordingly, not because you're angry but because you're finally faithful to the small resilient truth of your own life. The morning after the anniversary of that Mother's Day, I woke to rain. It was the good kind, the steady balm that makes streets smell honest. I opened the window and let the sound fill the apartment. Somewhere out there a garden was learning the lesson my aunt said it would teach: you can't rush roots. I brewed coffee and stood in the doorway of the balcony, watching the world be washed without being erased. I thought about the letter I never got to deliver in the way I meant, and the letter I read alone months later, and the letter I wrote to a boy who survived on crumbs and turned them into a map. I felt gratitude for every version of me that carried the others far enough to set them down. And then I went to my desk and started my day, my name in my inbox, my name on my own calendar, my name on the lease of a life that fits. If you've been listening for your own story, hear the one tucked under mine like a shadow you both fear and recognize. I hope you find the courage to do the simplest hard thing: stop arguing with the evidence and start building where the ground holds. Maybe it will look like a quiet boundary. Maybe it will sound like a phone that finally stays silent. Maybe it will feel like coming home to a place that has been waiting for you, yourself available, sufficient, loud enough to be heard by the only person whose hearing was always your responsibility. That's not revenge. That's repair. That's not punishment. That's practice. That's not the end of love. It's the beginning of the version that lasts. If this story sat with you, if it opened a window where there had been a wall, tap like to let the algorithm know stories like this matter. Share it with someone who needs to hear that boundaries are love in a different tense. Subscribe for more true reflective narratives about family and self-respect, and comment with the moment you realized you were done underliving.